Given that there are so many different roles and specialists employed at the United States' foremost Department of Law Enforcement, there really is no such thing as a typical day when it comes to working at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That being said, life within the FBI is a pretty far cry from your average 9-to-5 job. But unlike you might see in procedural shows on cable TV, it's not all full-on excitement busting big illegal arms deals, carrying out narcotics raids, or going into deep cover among shady criminal organizations. In this video, you'll be finding out about the day-to-day activities of various agents within the FBI, from special agents to criminal profilers, computer forensics, and cybercrime experts, all the way up to the top dog, the director of the FBI. Even though we pointed out that there's really no such thing as a typical day at the FBI, for many special agents their days can begin as early as 5:30 in the morning. One of the perks of being a federal agent is that you're permitted 3 hours to exercise per week, and that time is paid for by the government. So some agents might begin their days with a workout, or do so for an hour every other day of the week, whether that's by taking yoga classes or practicing their skills on the basketball court. Now, depending on how you tend to feel about exercise, that might either sound like a dream way to start your day, nice and energized, or like the most exhausting routine imaginable. But this isn't done to keep agents healthy and in good physical shape. It's actually a requirement of their job. Each year, federal agents are required to pass both a physical fitness test and a physical examination by a medical professional. Failure to pass either of these can lead to an automatic dismissal from the Bureau. So it's easy to see why using your paid exercise time every week is a wise move. After all, who else gets paid to go to the gym? Well, people who work in a gym, sure. Those who don't hit the exercise bike or the weights before they head to the office might start their morning with a far more intense wake-up call: firearms training. Those assigned to the Bureau's Washington field office can make use of the indoor shooting range situated at the FBI headquarters, or those stationed at the FBI Training Academy in Quantico, Virginia have access to a larger outdoor range. Federal agents are required to keep up with continuous training in order to carry out their roles in law enforcement, and that doesn't stop after they've got the job. It's an ongoing process. Firearms training typically takes place alongside other fellow special agents, practicing firing at a combination of fixed and moving targets at both long range and close quarters in order to prepare them for a variety of situations where they might have to use their weapon to engage an assailant or make an arrest. We'd imagine the sound of live gunfire in a shooting range would be a hell of a way to wake up. Far worse than your neighbors blaring Even Flow by Pearl Jam while mowing the lawn at an ungodly hour of the morning. After training, agents might spend time meticulously cleaning their firearms to make sure they're ready to fully function and avoid any jams in a tense situation. By around 7 o'clock in the morning, it's usually time for agents to head to their local field office. They might first arrive and head straight into meetings with their squads for briefings and updates on currently active cases. But how they spend the rest of their day is usually entirely dependent on the type of case that they're assigned to or are currently working. For example, a special agent working on a fraud case might spend several hours requesting and serving subpoenas to anyone who can provide tangible evidence that fraud has taken place. That could be anyone from banks to phone or internet service providers. Assuming those subpoenas are not only granted but obeyed, then that can mean further hours of combing through vast swaths of data looking for any information relevant to the case. An agent conducting an investigation into corruption might have to spend their morning combing through bank records and other financial documents in the hopes of tracking down where any ill-gotten proceeds might have ended up. Their focus is on finding evidence that a criminal violation occurred and proof that the subject of an investigation committed said violation. This meticulous searching is like looking for multiple straws of hay in several large piles of needles. Uncovering any new evidence during this laborious process doesn't even necessarily mean the agents are then free to head off and make an arrest. They more often than not have to present their findings to a higher-up within the Bureau, such as the assistant director. And of course, they need to have enough substantial evidence in order for an arrest warrant to be issued, which can often mean presenting an entire file or several to the higher-ups before a request for a warrant is even considered, let alone approved. And yes, by that we mean a literal physical file, not just something digital. Despite the amount of crimes that take place using computers and the amount of investigative material gathered from the internet, the FBI still prefers to gather hard copies of all of its paperwork. Of course, spending the day gathering evidence and other related casework isn't the reality every day for most FBI special agents. That's just what they might be doing, assuming that a more pressing matter doesn't suddenly emerge. Agents can be sat documenting an interview or filing requests for subpoenas one moment, only for something else entirely to take their attention away and completely derail what might have seemed like an uneventful day. Maybe one of their fellow agents comes rushing over to them telling them they need to leave now in order to assist a local police department with a missing persons case that's just been reported. Or a supervisory special agent might ask them to conduct a briefing to the director of the FBI on a recent case development. Perhaps a confidential human source who had previously gone dark suddenly reappears with information on another case. These are witnesses with potentially useful and credible evidence whose identities and ties to the FBI are kept hidden. In other words, an informant. Other times, they might be meeting with an attorney assigned to a case they're working on, providing talks on cyber safety to a local school, or even trawling through discarded garbage looking for a handwritten address or a phone number that might provide a substantial link between two suspects or a perpetrator and a victim. It sounds like a busy social schedule to cram into one day, but on the upside, if any of their meetings run into lunchtime, any food they get is covered by the Bureau. Let's say an agent working a bank robbery case suddenly receives word that one of the suspects has been located. This or anything else that establishes probable cause is usually enough to prompt a judge to grant a warrant, either calling for the arrest of a suspect or permitting the search of a particular building or property. Once that happens, then it's all hands on deck, with agents often getting fitted in tactical gear as they prepare to engage in an arrest. Well, not always. You'll only typically see FBI special agents getting outfitted in their body armor or drop holsters, complete with their not at all lame-looking Oakley sunglasses, if a suspect is considered to be armed and dangerous. Most search warrants and arrest warrants are carried out without the need for any kind of full-scale armed raid, as when applied incorrectly, this can be considered excessive force and harm the Bureau's case against a suspect. The majority of search and arrest warrants that are carried out are just administrative procedures, so long as the suspect isn't hostile and cooperates with the agent's requests. Special agents will gather physical evidence, take photographs of the scene where any of that evidence was recovered, and even make a list of everything that's seized during a search. If a suspect is arrested, they're taken in for further questioning back at the FBI's local office, where items recovered from the scene are logged one by one into the evidence locker. After this point, agents involved in executing these search and arrest warrants then have the fun task of writing up a report about it. That's why if ever someone, say, stole classified US government documents and kept them in their bathroom, they'd probably receive a knock on the door from a few agents in those navy blue jackets with FBI on the back, not an elite tactical squad breaking down their door with a battering ram. Of course, given the nature of some of the crimes the FBI investigates, sometimes the additional force of a full-blown armed response is called upon. This is where you see agents decked out in body armor, carrying automatic weapons and yelling cool phrases like, "All clear, check your corners," and "Our forces have lost a command post." Okay, maybe not that last one. This is perhaps the only part of the job that is sometimes close to how it's seen in TV and the movies. Battering rams, breaking down doors, beams of flashlights mounted to the Picatinny rails of M4 rifles, tasers sitting in holsters as a backup in case a non-lethal takedown is required. In these arrest situations, especially carrying out arrests of more dangerous assailants, FBI agents are more likely to be confronted with someone who will try to kill them. After all, those who feel threatened by all that tactical gear, whose freedom is about to be taken away, are more likely to retaliate and pose a potential danger, especially if the suspect is known to have a criminal history of violence and access to firearms. Given that arrests like these are often fraught with potential risk, they usually require the support of SWAT teams from local police departments, if available, who will work alongside the FBI special agents to secure an arrest. This isn't the only armed backup on site either, as sometimes upwards of 15 other FBI agents will participate in arrests wherein the suspect is thought to have a propensity for violence. It isn't just a case of storming in guns blazing like those FBI open up memes. In fact, given the amount of personnel and resources that are needed to be deployed in order to make a high-profile or high-risk arrest, you can see why the judges are reluctant to sign off on warrants unless the FBI has gathered enough evidence of probable cause. Everyone participating in the arrest needs to be briefed on the situation beforehand. Often, if the suspect is hiding inside a building, then this will involve looking at floor plans and maps to determine the best possible strategy for capturing the suspect alive. Simply sweeping each floor might provide the suspect with an opportunity to escape via a staircase or a fire ladder, or slip out through the rear exit. So agents might instruct one of the SWAT officers to rappel down from the rooftop and search from top to bottom, while another works their way up from the ground floor with the intention of trapping the suspect in between the two groups. One of the primary concerns for any arrest like this is maintaining the safety of everyone involved, as well as the members of the public in the area. Every possible contingency has to be considered before an arrest can go ahead, and that applies whether the suspect is thought to have robbed a bank or been involved in the sale of narcotics. The goal of an armed arrest, despite what the excessive tactical gear and firearms might suggest, is never to kill a suspect, but to bring them out alive. In a lot of cases, knowing that there are so many armed agents and officers approaching them is terrifying enough to prevent a suspect from acting against their own best interests. Most surrender and are taken into custody without incident, while those that do attempt to retaliate are often incapacitated, either via a non-fatal gunshot or a taser, and then the arrest is carried out, after which point they'll likely be rushed to a hospital with agents keeping a close watch over them so that their injuries can be treated quickly as possible without them taking the opportunity to make a break for it. If a suspect is captured alive and unharmed, they're usually brought back to the local FBI field office to be processed. You know what that means? More of the Bureau's favorite pastime, paperwork. Case files need to be updated. Records are made of the arrest and any questioning that takes place with the subject once they're in custody. It's all important information that needs to be documented as part of the investigation. An arrest isn't usually the game over that it's presented as in movies, although it can be the turning point wherein a case moves toward its conclusion, the suspect being put on trial. For many FBI agents, this can be the most frustrating part of their day, and a case as a whole. While it varies in different parts of the U.S., most judges that preside over federal cases impose strict time frames in which they will see suspects for their initial appearance in court. If a suspect has managed to evade capture for long enough, has been uncooperative during interrogation, or has been injured during an armed arrest, this can sometimes cause a significant delay to the administrative proceedings that FBI agents have to complete before taking them to court for this initial appearance. Arriving at the courthouse outside of the time window provided by the judge can mean that agents then have to move suspects to federal detention centers to wait for the judge to provide a new time window for the hearing. Depending on the distance between detention centers and the courthouse, as well as waiting for the judge's next available time slot, FBI agents can find themselves waiting for several days to bring their arrested suspect before a judge. If other federal agents have also missed the time slots, then a line can start to form of multiple agents waiting to present their suspects to the judge. Once the FBI agents are able to get their suspects in front of a judge, provided it's before the deadline elapses, then the suspect is handed back to the federal detention center and the U.S. Marshals to await trial. And in the United States, the wheels of justice tend to turn really slowly. So after several long hours of firefights, arrests, courthouses, and mountains of paperwork, the day of an FBI special agent draws to a close. Once files on the case have been updated at the field office, agents are normally free to head home, roughly by about 10:30 at night, where they have just enough time left to grab a microwave dinner and get some shut-eye ahead of the next morning's early start. As for tomorrow's working day, well, if they're not conducting arrests, executing search warrants, or gathering evidence for their next case, then they might be meeting with sources, examining newly acquired intelligence on illegal activity, and, of course, catching up on more paperwork. But working for the FBI isn't all about being a special agent. There are also those whose jobs focus on more specialized areas, such as conducting training, examining fingerprints and other forensic lab work, even dealing with public relations, and liaising with the press. For example, take criminal profilers, often working with the FBI's famous Behavioral Analysis Unit. While that might on the surface sound pretty boring, these are the agents with the FBI responsible for tracking down the serial killers. Through examining evidence, conducting interviews with other similar offenders, and having a vast knowledge of different categories of criminal behavior, these criminal profilers are able to help narrow down vast pools of potential suspects, and based on all of that information, just like in a game of Clue, figure out exactly who done it. You see, there's a common misconception that especially with an ongoing series of connected crimes like serial killings, profilers are coming up with one suspect based on all of the evidence. But in reality, what they're actually doing is whittling down a huge number of potential suspects to the most likely candidates. Otherwise, that's a lot of taxpayer dollars being spent chasing down leads and researching alibis that could end up going nowhere. So, through the use of behavioral analysis, FBI profilers take a look at the possible suspects and narrow them down into a more manageable list. The day of an FBI criminal profiler, or a mind hunter as they're sometimes known, will often start with reviewing the case they've been assigned to. This means going over the files they might already have read enough times to have memorized, looking at potentially gruesome and gory crime scene photographs, and reading or rereading again the autopsies and statements from the witnesses. But this isn't just to keep the details of the case fresh in their minds and make sure they have a complete and comprehensive understanding of the crime. What they're actually looking for is understanding the behavior of the criminal or even the killer themselves. Profilers are called mind hunters because their whole job is to put themselves in the twisted mind of a killer to determine how they might behave or react. One of the ways to achieve that is for mind hunters to immerse themselves in the full, unfiltered griminess of the crime that's been committed, including whatever agony is inflicted on a victim by the killer. By understanding the killer's actions, it sheds light on their psychology. How they interact with their victims can help mind hunters identify potential behavioral patterns that could even point to where these killers might strike next. With an understanding of what a crime entails, however gruesome, profilers will move on to the next part of their day, behavioral analysis. Based on the available amount of information, they will attempt to construct, as the job title suggests, a profile of their suspected criminal. By applying their knowledge of criminology and psychology and pairing this with any available forensic data gathered from the crime scenes, FBI profilers will attempt to understand the reasoning behind the perpetrator's violent actions and how these might have been the result of or influenced by certain behavioral patterns or personality traits. Once the case has been reviewed and the psychological profile of the potential suspect has been built, profilers still have a ways to go before figuring out exactly who the suspect is. Say they're able to figure out, based on applicable evidence, that the perpetrator has narcissistic tendencies. Well, that could apply to almost anyone, from an emerald mine oligarch to an ex-wrestler turned bad Hollywood actor. So this is where the role of an FBI profiler requires input from other members of the Bureau and a wider law enforcement community as a whole. The next part of their day might be spent in consultation with investigators looking at the same case, detectives from local police departments, and anyone else who can provide insight different from the mind hunter's own. This can help when it comes to knowing how to proceed with certain cases. For example, cops might have determined that someone known to one of the victims could be involved, which gives criminal profilers potential suspects to prioritize looking into. From here, the fieldwork stage of the day comes into play. This can involve visiting crime scenes to gather additional first-hand information and aid their insights into the mind of the killer. The behavioral analysis is also further aided and shaped by conducting interviews with any witnesses, victims who are still alive, or other potential suspects. Once the FBI profilers have been able to gather this additional information through fieldwork, it then comes time to write up their findings in detail and summarize their analysis and any recommendations in a report. These reports are then passed on to other law enforcement agencies in order to act as a resource that assists with an ongoing investigation into what is usually a grisly series of crimes. However, if they aren't spending their time during the day-to-day conducting behavioral analysis and compiling psychological profiles of suspects, FBI mind hunters can be called upon to deliver testimony in court. Given their expertise and role in developing detailed profiles of dangerous killers, by understanding their behaviors, criminal profilers are considered expert witnesses. Presenting their findings to judges, jurors, and attorneys can prove vital in swinging the outcome of a case against an allegedly violent perpetrator. Appearing before a court like this doesn't just require in-depth knowledge of the cases and the suspects, but an ability to communicate clearly and present potentially complex criminological and psychological concepts in a simplified, understandable way to courtrooms that will likely not share the same level of knowledge as the presenting profiler. Other days might see the FBI mind hunters in training and development or attending workshops and conferences that delve into the latest research in the field of criminal profiling. Part of performing well as a profiler is being able to continuously learn and apply an ever-developing understanding of criminal psychologies and behaviors to the cases being solved. So, that's criminal profilers. What about the evidence response team? These are the folks you might think of when you think of CSIs. As the job title suggests, they respond directly to crimes in order to gather evidence, be that at the site of a recent bank robbery or the wake of a plane crash. They look into anything from kidnappings, shootings, and recovering bodies to train derailments, and even carry out some of the aforementioned search warrants, whether they've been gathering evidence from a corrupt politician's office or a house where drugs are believed to be stashed. One often overlooked side of the activity that falls under the FBI's purview is the gathering and examination of intelligence. That's not evaluating how smart people are. In this context, intelligence refers to the information that is of particular value, be it either political or for military use. In the case of the FBI, the intelligence they gather helps inform decisions the Bureau makes in terms of how to best protect the citizens of the United States. Intelligence analysts are the driving force behind the FBI's intelligence gathering efforts, and they are often responsible for uncovering information surrounding ongoing criminal activity, even that which relates to organized crime. This intelligence is essential in identifying potential threats, as well as highlighting any vulnerabilities within the Bureau or the wider global intelligence community. Intelligence analysts within the FBI assess tons of complex information in order to make real-time analytical judgments. They're able to do this thanks to the wealth of federal resources they have available, including surveillance archives, law enforcement databases, and geographic information systems. An analyst's day consists of them receiving swaths of new intelligence from their multiple sources, which they then have to confirm the validity of. They might also have to create written assessments of their findings, compile reports, and even provide presentations that detail any potential threats they believe they've identified. These threats can range from widespread gang activity to the sale and trafficking of narcotics, money laundering, or even potentially uncovering terrorist plots. Of course, going through all that information by yourself every day would be enough to drive a person insane. That's why some days intelligence analysts will meet and liaise with representatives of other intelligence-gathering organizations, such as the National Security Agency. By working directly with them, the FBI's analysts are able to collaborate on intelligence-gathering efforts and coordinate related actions that might be required as a result of their shared findings. Within the Bureau as well, analysts rarely work alone, spending their days alongside teams that might be focused on gathering data related to a specific case or a type of criminal activity, systemically analyzing and interpreting the information and assessing its validity. While the work itself can vary depending on the type of intelligence being gathered, this is more of an indoorsy role within the FBI. Unlike the work of special agents and even criminal profilers, the trade-off for having a less intense job within the Bureau and not spending your time visiting crime scenes or conducting arrests is that analysts have a far more regimented work schedule, which typically lasts around 40 hours a week. Having a schedule like that at least means the job is a little more predictable than the wild uncertainty faced by special agents on a day-to-day basis. Plus, you get to spend your time in an air-conditioned office instead of potentially being shot at by armed suspects. Speaking of the intelligence side of the FBI's day-to-day activities, that doesn't just involve the work of analysts, but also counterintelligence agents who work to stop spies. Now, you're probably thinking that this means tracking down sleeper agents, like something out of a Mission Impossible movie. Or you might even be thinking the whole idea of dealing with spies is more within the wheelhouse of the CIA. But here's the rub. The CIA is legally denied from operating within the US, only conducting intelligence operations internationally, and allegedly backing coups to overthrow foreign governments. That's why the FBI's counterintelligence agents exist, to investigate and expose intelligence activities within the U.S. Among their principal goals are the protection of crucial assets within the wider U.S. intelligence community and keeping sensitive information, like that relating to national defense, the economy, as well as public health, technology, and science sectors out of the hands of foreign spies. Oh, and the FBI counterintelligence is also responsible for keeping weapons of mass destruction out of the reach of spies. So, no pressure whatsoever. Now, that's not to say that counterintelligence spends their days standing at missile silos ready to throw down with the first suspicious person they see. A lot of their day-to-day work revolves around their own cases specific to their local field office. While an overarching national strategy outlines how to respond to key threats, counterintelligence agents will typically focus on core areas that they have a particularly strong expertise in. For example, one agent might find themselves looking into security risks surrounding defense contractors who are working with the U.S. government. This might involve meeting with managers at these corporations to assess any vulnerabilities they may have. Counterintelligence really revolves around protecting vital U.S. assets that could be of potential interest to foreign countries looking to gather sensitive intelligence. That means working directly with the military, as well as other investigative parts of the FBI itself that might be looking into overlapping threats. It's much more about preventing outside spies from getting to that information than it is chasing down suave men in suits with reels of microfilm in their pockets and a tranquilizer dart launcher in their fountain pen. Of course, as counterintelligence agents will attest, the vast majority of spying is done through stealing data from computer networks. With so much cyber-based crime in general, it's no surprise that one of the other key members of the FBI's arsenal whose counterintelligence agents work closely with are those who specialize in computer forensics. Back in the 90s, when computer usage started becoming more prevalent in public and private sectors, as well as seeing a skyrocket in everyday civilian use as computers became more affordable, the FBI developed new operating procedures for handling crimes that took place digitally, as well as the handling of digital evidence. An FBI computer forensics investigator is trained to combine skills in forensics and cybersecurity skills to find digital information that can be used to support ongoing investigations, like those being carried out by special agents and counterintelligence agents. A typical day for them can revolve around retrieving protected or encrypted data from the hard drives and the devices of suspects or victims in certain cases, which normally means spending a lot of their time restoring files, images, or message histories that someone might have attempted to erase in order to hide evidence and cover their tracks. Computer forensics investigators also look into network breaches, particularly when a suspect has gained unauthorized access to an organization's computer servers. By gathering data from these intrusions, computer forensics analysts have to determine exactly how breaches took place and what software or methods were used. This can involve several hours of having to recreate the scenarios wherein a breach took place in order to understand what potential cybersecurity weaknesses were exploited. Even though they deal with the digital information, computer forensics investigators also aren't free from the reach of the most dreaded part of any FBI agent's life: paperwork. Parts of their days also have to be spent compiling reports that reflect their findings and how they were able to uncover important evidence that pertains to cases. Then, that leaves the person right at the top of the Bureau's chain of command, the FBI's director. Alongside their appointed deputy, the director oversees the day-to-day operations of the entire Federal Bureau of Investigation, ensuring that all active cases and ongoing operations are handled according to the correct procedures. You won't see the director of the FBI strapping on his tactical vest and pulling out a ridiculously oversized handgun to join in the fight themselves when things get back, like Danny Glover's character from Predator 2. No, the FBI director is much more like a company manager. Their day-to-day activities might be largely concerned with hiring or firing the heads of FBI leaders in any one of the Bureau's field offices and making sure that qualified agents are being assigned to the more demanding cases. Up until 2004, the director of the FBI did have one exciting activity that could change up the otherwise ordinary day: meeting with the President of the United States. If any issues arose within the FBI, the director would be tasked with presenting these to the President. However, this is not the case anymore, as in 2004, the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act was brought into effect as a direct result of the 2001 September 11th terror attacks on the World Trade Center. Ever since, the FBI's director now reports to an appointed director of national intelligence, who in turn will pass on the FBI's reports up the chain to the president himself. Now check out 50 insane declassified FBI secrets you didn't know, or watch this video instead.